Wonderful. Happy Thanksgiving this week. But just a couple quick announcements. Number one is if you haven't signed up for a sermon journal for 2025, sign-up list is out there on the table. December will be ending here before we know it. Those are free to you, so to walk you through all the messages for 2025, you can keep them all in one little booklet there. But we just need you to sign up so we know how many of those to make for the start of the year. Also, if you would like to go on the trips out there as well. And then next week, we are going to start a series entitled The Blank That Stole Christmas. And so we're going to look at some things that have a tendency to steal the joy, the meaning, the reason why we celebrate Christmas. So we're going to start that next week. It's going to culminate then with our Christmas Eve service. If you don't know this, it'll be on December 24th. And we're going to have two services, 5:30, 6:30. And the service will be about a half hour each in lineups and some tickets because it gets really crowded in here on Christmas Eve. And so we just want to make sure that we have not too many people coming to the one service. So that'll be available next week as well. But today, I do want to bring your attention. I think in your bulletin it says that we are in Matthew chapter 12. That's incorrect. We're going to be in Luke chapter 12. And since Lindsay, the secretary, is not here this week, I'm just going to blame it on her. Okay, so Lindsay, if you're watching, all your fault. But anyways, so today we are going to be in Luke chapter 12, not Matthew chapter 12. So that's where we're going to be this morning as I wrap up this series entitled Chasing Carrots, the Endless Pursuit for More and More. I had a problem in my life that I really didn't even realize I had the problem. And then when I discovered that I actually had the problem, I didn't want to admit that I had the problem. And as I go through today, I think maybe some of you are going to be in the same place in which I was, or maybe I still am in my life. But it all occurred to me about 15 years ago. There was a young man in our church who needed a car. He needed to go to a job. I can't really remember. It was a job interview or something like that. And so he asked me, he said, "Hey, you have two cars. Could I borrow one of your cars?" And immediately I said, "Absolutely. You can borrow one of my cars." And I had two cars at the time. I had an old Honda Civic that had 250,000 miles on it. And then I had a fairly new Chrysler 300M. Now, if you don't know what the difference between those two cars, a Honda Civic, it's just a really small, compact car, bare bones. I think I even had to use a handle to roll the window down on it. The Chrysler 300M had leather interior, had heated seats. It's considered a full-size luxury car. So let me ask you, which one do you think I offered to him? Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I offered him the Honda Civic. If you thought different of me, then you're going to find out a lot about me today. So I offered him the Honda Civic. And so that day he got to my house and he was getting ready to take the car. I gave him the keys to the car. He opened the door. He looked in. He said, "Oh, I can't drive this car." I said, "Well, why can't you drive this car?" He said, "It's a manual transmission. I can't drive manual transmission." He said, "You have another car. Could I borrow that car?" I paused for a minute. And immediately in my mind, I was just racing through some excuses that maybe I could give him to not allow him to drive my nice car. And I considered even lying to him. And I thought, I'm a pastor. I probably shouldn't do that. And so reluctantly, I said, "Well, okay, you can borrow my other car." And so he took the car. And the moment he left, the moment he got out of my sight, like I was just praying and I was worrying that he was going to get in a car wreck or something like that. Now, again, I'm a terrible guy, okay? And I was praying that not because I was concerned about him. I was concerned about my car, okay? And so eventually he got back and, he got back. I was glad he was back, didn't wreck the car, and he left. And as soon as he left, I started walking around my car looking for scratches or dents that he had put in it. And it occurred to me at that moment, like I stopped, I had this moment of self-realization at that point, and I realized that I was more concerned about my car than I was about this young man. And it dawned on me that I was more concerned about possessions than I was about people. And I don't hear God speak to me audibly, but in that moment, I felt God saying to me, "You're greedy. You're greedy." Now, if you were to ask me before that, "Are you greedy?" I would have immediately said, no, I'm not greedy. I probably could be a little bit more generous in my life, but I'm definitely not greedy. because greed oftentimes hides itself under virtuous characteristics, right? We say that we're being careful, or we're being thoughtful, or we're trying to plan ahead, and we use all of these virtuous words because oftentimes when we hear the word greed, there's these images that conjure up in our mind, right? We think of Ebenezer Scrooge, who's sitting behind his desk in his miserly fingers and counting all of his money. I have some pictures of them here. Or we think of Gollum from the Lord of the Rings story, and he's wanting the ring, and my precious, and he's wanting the ring, and it destroys him. Or we think of Mr. Krabs, who ran the Krusty Krab in, most of you don't know, SpongeBob SquarePants, right? And he ran this restaurant, and all he was concerned about was making a profit, because we don't like to use the word greed because these are the people we think about. And I'm not greedy. And what we're going to discover here, the greed comes in all kinds of different forms. And though we may not want to admit it, or maybe we can't even identify it in our lives, that sometimes we're actually greedy in our lives. We're chasing after carrots. We're chasing after the carrot of money and stuff. And we're chasing after these things. And what we discover, like all the things that we've been talking about in this series, is that they never really fully satisfy us. And so we're on this endless pursuit for more and more and more. And I just want to counteract a common fallacy when it comes to this issue, because oftentimes we think that greed is a financial issue, right? That it's rich people who are greedy. After all, that's how they got rich, right? But listen, I've met rich people who are greedy. I've met middle-class people who are greedy. And I have met poor people who are greedy. Because we're pursuing after these things. We all have these times, these moments in our lives in which we're pursuing after things only to discover that they do not fully satisfy. And so today I'm wrapping up this series entitled Chasing Carrots, the Endless Pursuit for More and More. Because the truth is that we all are desiring, we're all chasing after things in our life in order to satisfy the deepest longings in our heart, only to discover that they leave us just wanting more and more and more. And then our memory verse for the series comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 14. And so we're here at the end of the series. And this memory verse, which you should have memorized by now, tells us what? I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. The King Solomon, in all of his wisdom, said everything that he sees under the sun, it's just like chasing after wind. It's chasing after carrots. They never really fully satisfy. And so just a brief overview here. We looked first week about the popularity carrot. And there we learned that when people are big, that God is small. That when we want the acceptance and the popularity and the approval of the people around us, it makes God really small in our life. And I told you, ask yourself a question. Whose opinion of you matters most in your life? The second week, Pastor John did a great job talking about the political carrot. And there he talked about, hey, we are to do what is due. And Jesus said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render to God the things that are God's. That we live in an earthly kingdom, but we are members of a heavenly kingdom. And our allegiance is much higher than to the kingdom of this world. And there we encourage you to pledge your allegiance to Jesus. The third week, we looked at the happiness carrot, and there we looked at the Beatitudes, and we learned that being blessed is better than being happy. And if you read those Beatitudes about blessed are the poor in spirit and blessed are those who are persecuted, it's actually counterintuitive to what we would do to find happiness, because being blessed is so much better than being happy. And then last week, we looked at the control carrot. And we have those things in our life that we want to control, but we discover that you cannot control what you cannot control. And how many of you let go of the control of loading the dishwasher, okay? And you let it just be a free-for-all in the dishwasher now. But give up the control of those things that really don't matter, and the things that really God is to control is only for him to control. And so today we're talking about this idea of chasing after money and stuff. And the take-home truth that I want to give you today is this, is that all that you have can have all of you. And that is, in my mind, a perfect definition of greed, is that when all that I have has all of me. It's the perfect definition. It's very concise. It's very to the point of those people who are chasing after the carrot of money and stuff. It's when all that I have has all that I am. And today we're going to see in Jesus, in here in Luke chapter 12, we're going to see in Jesus' words how we are to identify this in our lives and how we can actually counteract it in our lives as well. And so we're going to look here in Luke chapter 12. And in Luke chapter 12, Jesus conveys this idea through a parable. Now, if you're not sure what a parable is a story that was told. It was kind of fictional people, but it was a story that was told in order to get across, convey a deep spiritual truth or a moral imperative that we are to have in our lives. Some people define parables this way: it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And Jesus used parables all the time. He told stories in order to help people understand and to illustrate some great spiritual truths. And this one is no different. As he talks about greed and the pursuit of more and more and more, he used a parable in order to illustrate this very vividly for the people of his day, and by extension, you and I today. And what we're going to discover in this parable is that all that you have can have all of you. And so let's start here, and we're going to look at just how this opens, because Jesus launched into this conversation, into this teaching, just simply because of a question that was asked him. So in Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 13, it tells us this: someone in the crowd said to him, so he's there with a bunch of people, and someone speaks up and he said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Now, in these days, it was tradition for the eldest son of a Jewish family to get the lion's share of the inheritance. And so this younger brother is coming to Jesus. He said, "Jesus, I need you to do my bidding. Like, he has all this, he's not sharing it with me. And so why don't you tell him to give me some of what he got?" Jesus answered in verse 14, he said to him, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter over you?" Basically, in today's vernacular, Jesus said, "Dude, do I look like Judge Judy? Like, why are you asking me to do this? Why should I get involved in this?" And Jesus does not get involved in this family squabble. He doesn't he doesn't come to this younger brother and say, "Yeah, your older brother should give you more." He doesn't do that, but he uses it as a springboard to launch into a teaching that he wanted everyone to understand and to internalize. And that teaching was, you got to be careful, because all that you have can have all of you. And so the first thing that we see here is the deceptiveness of greed. Greed disguises itself. It's sneaky. It is very, very deceptive in our lives, because oftentimes one of the traits of greed is we don't even realize that we have it. And so Jesus started this way after he had said, "Hey, I'm not Judge Judy. I'm not taking care of this." In verse 15, then he said to them, not just this young man, but he said to all of them, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed." Now, he started here, he said, beware, be on your guard. The words that are written here in Luke, in the original Greek, were words that were used in a military sense. If you were to watch out for the enemies, you were to beware or be on guard. And Jesus used that same terminology. Matthew or Luke wrote it here, same terminology, that we need to be on the lookout. Be on the lookout, and it's a continuous action here, that we're to do it today and tomorrow and the day after that. Continually, we're to be on the lookout against every form of greed. And he gives this stern warning because greed is so deceptive. And what I find fascinating is Jesus didn't use this terminology about, you can't read it anywhere else about any other sin. He didn't say beware and be on your guard for adultery, or beware or be on a guard against lying, because typically if you're committing adultery, you know that you're doing it. If you're lying, you typically know that you're doing it. And here he says you need to beware, be on your guard, because greed is so deceptive you don't even realize that you have it. Because greed can be seen in the window and is much harder to see in the mirror. What do I mean by that? Like when you hear the word greed, like you know people in your life, you'd say, yeah, that person and that person and that person is greedy. But it's so difficult sometimes to see it in our own lives. And so we can see it in the window, but we don't necessarily see it in the mirror. And I've been in ministry for 25 years. And I've had people come to me and they say, hey, I need help with my problem of lust, or I need help with my problem of anger, or I need help because I have a problem of lying. But I've never, in 25 years, I've never had somebody come to me and say, I need you to pray for me. I need you to help me. I need advice because I got a problem of greed. Like, it's never happened because we don't necessarily see it. And so Jesus said, be aware, be on your guard against every form of greed. And he went on. And he said, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. To which all of us would sit here and we would shake our heads and say, yes, yes. So like, my life is more than what I have. However, we typically as Americans live our lives believing the exact opposite. Because in just a few days, after we sit down with friends and family and have a Thanksgiving meal, the very next day, or maybe even that night, we're going to probably go shopping. And on Black Friday, they estimate that this year, Americans are going to spend $10.9 billion on Friday alone. Now, let me help you understand that. If you were to spend $1 a second to spend $10.9 billion, it would take you 345 years. Like, we hear billions and trillions and we don't think much of it, but that's how much that is. 345 years of seconds is 10.9 billion. We make, as Americans, typically we make on average 4 times more than everyone else in the world. And we yet spend 98% of our income on ourselves. It is written statistically that we spend more on our pets, pet care, than we do giving to poverty. The average American now spends $1.25 for every dollar that they make. And we're going into debt because though we may sit here and shake our head and say, yeah, it's true, the life is more than just what I have, we live our lives opposite of that truth. And we live practically saying that, yes, my life does consist of what I have. And so Jesus said, beware, be on guard against this, against every form of greed, because life is more than just what you have. You need to be careful because all that you have can ultimately have all of you. And so in verse 16, he said this, and he told them a parable. He started his story now. He told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. So this man was rich, and in agricultural terms today, we would say he had a bumper crop. And so he was rich, and now he was even richer because he had just had this amazing productive crop in his fields. Verse 17, and he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? This bumper crop, and now I have no place to store all of my stuff. To which all of us would sarcastically say, I feel so sorry for you. All right, you got way too much stuff. You don't know where to put it. I had the opportunity to go on a missions trip to Luxembourg and Germany when I was in college. So this was 1996. And if you're not familiar, Luxembourg is a small country in Central Europe, and it's the home of international banking. And so all these international banks are there. And the family that I stayed with, the father of that family was a bank manager of one of these international banks. This is a literal statement I heard one morning when I was staying in her house. He said to his son, he said, you need to move the Mercedes because I've got to take the Porsche because the Jaguar won't start. In 1996, that was $250,000 worth of automobiles. Literal conversation. And when I heard that, in my mind, I said to myself, I feel so sorry for you. And so that's where this guy is at. He's like, I got so much stuff. I don't know what to do with it all. And so in verse 18, then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. To which, in our world today, we would say, good job. He's got great business savvy. right? He would be a guy who would be on all the podcasts doing interviews about how to become a grain empire. He would be interviewed by all the news shows. He would be writing books about how you can be an entrepreneur as well. And so he looked at all that he had. I don't have enough room. And so what do I need to do? All right, I'm just going to build bigger barns. I'm going to have a great empire. And in our world today, we would say that is what we all ought to pursue after. But then look at what it says here. If you look back in verses 17 and 18, how many times, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. He thought it all belonged to him. To which we would say, where is God in that equation? You know, you are not the one responsible for causing the crops to grow. Yes, you planted it. Yes, you tilled the soil. Yes, you harvested it. But it's God who provided all of this. And then in verse 19, he said, and I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. He's got it all. He can retire early. I mean, his 401k is maxed out. And he said, you know what? I can retire early. I can kick my feet up and I can take my ease and I can eat and drink and be merry. And our world would say, yes, that's what we all ought to emulate. That's all what we all ought to strive to be like. But what he has missed here is in the process of this rich man and the crops and the barns and all the expansion, subtly, deceptively, all that he had all of him. He didn't own his stuff owned him. And what we see next is Jesus uses this, and he kind of switches directions here, and he shows the destructiveness of greed. That yes, it is deceptive, but greed ultimately is very, very destructive. It can destroy relationships, it can destroy professions, it can destroy lives because of this insatiable desire for more and more and more. So in verse 20, after he had kicked his feet back and said, I can now eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? The world called him an idol. Social media called him a rock star. God called him a fool. And he said, you fool, who will own what you have prepared? Let me ask you, who's going to own everything that this man had? It's an easy answer. Someone else. You ever think about that? Everything that you currently own, one day is going to be owned by someone else. Malcolm Forbes, he was the founder and editor of Forbes magazine. He made this statement. He said, he who has the most toys at the end wins. And it became extremely popular in the 1980s. And here what we learn from this verse is he who has the most toys still dies. He still dies. And so even just as he did not see fit to acknowledge God in everything that he had, he did not see fit to acknowledge God for even the days that he had left. And he said, even though, hey, I have more than enough, his life did not even last to expend all that he had. And he said, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? Verse 21, so is the man who stores up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God. Jesus said, this is not just a story. He said, this is an illustration of every person who lives like this. And he said, this is the fate of every man who stores up for treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. What's that fate? It's not the fate that he was going to die, because listen, we're all going to die. It wasn't the fate that you might die prematurely or surprisingly, because listen, none of us know the exact second that we're going to die. What Jesus was talking about here, this is the fate of every man who has nothing to show for in their lives. Because the truth is that all of us, with everything that we own, either we're going to invest or we're going to divest. Invest means that we're going to pay it forward. We're going to invest in things, or it's going to be divested of us, which means it's just all going to be taken away. And he said here, this is the man who he has nothing to show for everything that he had. And he said, this is the same that's going to happen for every man who stores up treasure for himself and is not. The problem was not that he was rich. There are many faithful people throughout scriptures who were rich. Abraham was rich. Job was rich. There are rich, faithful people that live today. It's not an issue of being rich. It's not even an issue about saving, like we should save. Saving throughout scriptures is applauded and it's valued. What he's saying here, the problem is, he was just concerned about himself and was not rich toward God. He did not make any eternal investment with what he had. And Jesus said, so is the fate. So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So let's ask ourselves our favorite question. Because this is true, what should we do? But before I answer that question, I just want to ask you another question. Why do you think oftentimes we want to hold on to everything that we have? Why is it that we're greedy sometimes? And I think the answer to that question is just a simple word: fear. We're afraid. Because most of the times that we respond that way, we always use the what ifs. What if I don't have enough? What if it gets broken? What if it gets scratched? What if it gets dented? What if they get more than I do? What if the economy changes? And we live in this idea of fear. Because all that you have can have all of you. And so that's why, if we're just going to go on here and look at a few more verses, that's why Jesus went on here. I just don't want to stop there, but he went on and he gives some more teaching that coincides with this parable that he just said. In verse 22, he said to his disciples, for this reason, which Jesus was saying, hey, because this is true, I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor your body as to what you will put on. He's like, don't be afraid. Don't fear those things. Verse 23, for life is more than food, and the body more than clothing, which goes back to what he had just said earlier. Life is more than just your stuff. So don't be afraid. Verse 30, for all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things. Jesus saying, listen, if you're a follower of mine, you're to live differently than the world around you. Everyone around you is chasing after more stuff and more money. He said, don't live like that. You're my follower. Trust me. Don't live in fear. Trust me. And so here's what I want you to do. And this is going to come from the words of Jesus. How you combat greed in your life? Because this is true, what should you do? Be generous. Be generous. Being generous is one of the habits of a committed follower of Christ. It's the B of the habits. Be generous. And again, that's exactly what Jesus said here. In verse 33, he said, sell all your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts, which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near, nor moth destroys. Jesus is just saying, be generous. Don't be like this man, and be generous. I have a really quick question. How many of you here like chocolate chip cookies? Grant, you like chocolate chip cookies? All right, come on up here. You shouldn't have raised your hand. Come on. Come on, hurry up. We got a little bit. All right, yeah. You don't have to run. Yeah, but anyways, all right. So, all right, come on. You shouldn't have raised your hand. All right. So Grant loves, this is Grant Yoder. Say hi to everyone. All right. So Grant loves chocolate chip cookies. And it just so happens, Grant, that Mimi, right here in the front row, Wendy, she made some chocolate chip cookies and gave me 2 cookies.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I really like chocolate chip cookies too. These are really, really good.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, Grant, let me ask, I need some milk. I don't know how I'm going to eat that second one. But Grant, imagine if my mom was here. What do you think my mom would say?
She would say you need some milk for those cookies.
I think, everybody out there, what are you thinking right now? What would my mom tell me? What do you want to tell me? Yeah, they want me to share a cookie with you. That would be really nice, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But you know what? I got a second service here, and I may need that cookie, okay? And, once this cookie's gone, what happens if I don't have the second cookie? So maybe I should just keep that cookie, right? I'm going to pray for you. Jesus knows exactly the situation. He knows you love chocolate chip cookies, and he knows you need a cookie. And I'm going to pray someone comes along and gives you a cookie, but I'm going to keep my cookie. Now, let's imagine, well, not imagine, we know that God knows everyone in the world who has 2 cookies. And he knows everyone in the world who has no cookies. And our good Heavenly Father would say to us what? Share. Share. Don't pray. Don't give him platitudes. But share. So, because I want to be a good Christ follower, I'm going to give you a dozen cookies.
Thank you.
Now, Grant, after the service, all these people are going to tell you what?
Share the cookies.
Yeah, because they have no cookies. All right. Yeah, thanks for coming up, Grant. All right. You see the point there, right? God has blessed us. And we are to be generous because either we can invest or it's going to be divested of us. We can give freely to someone else, or in the end, someone else is going to have it anyways because we cannot take it with us. So let me just wrap up here as I've been doing through the series, asking a couple diagnostic questions, kind of like a doctor prodding, pushing, find out maybe where it hurts the most, okay? Let me ask you this, the first question. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why do I have what I have? Why do I have 2 cookies? Why has God given me the house? Why has God given me the money? Why has God blessed me with the time? Why has God given me the resources? Why do I have what I have? And if the answer is just me, Jesus says, so is the fate of every man who is not rich towards God. And then the second question that maybe we should ask is where can I invest? Are there organizations in the world that are taking the gospel to the remotest parts of the earth that I can invest in? That's an eternal investment. Are there nonprofits that are making a difference in our community and making a difference in the lives of the people around us? Maybe I need to invest there. Are there people around us who just don't have any cookies that I can be generous towards and help them? Now listen, I just want to be clear here. This message is not that the church wants your money. Listen, God doesn't need your money. This message is because God wants your heart. And Jesus said in Luke chapter 16, verse 13, for no man can serve 2 masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. And then he said, you cannot serve God and wealth. He said, you have a choice. You can chase after the carrot of money and stuff, or you can chase after God. But you can't chase after both. And so when those times in my life in which I just want to hold on tight, what I need to say is, you know what? Greed, You have no power over me. And watch this. I am going to be generous. Because all that you have can have all of you. So be generous. And one day, you will be glad that you did. He said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. Father, we thank you. We thank you that we can give because you ultimately gave most. John 3:16 reminds us, for God so loved the world that he gave. We thank you for the salvation that was afforded to us through your giving of your Son for us. And it's only when we give, only when we are generous, that we look most like you. And so I pray for all of us in this room, whatever our condition is, that we would find ways, look for opportunities to just simply be generous and be rich towards God. Knowing that in the end, you're going to do exceeding abundantly above what we could even ask or think. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.